When analyzing a language, there are several subfields that one should take into account. Phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, each of these areas contributes something unique to communication. And it is when these areas interact with one another do we get language. As I stated in the last transmission, this series will focus on the Ur-Kittat languages, and as such, we will look into and analyze the language through the lens of each discipline, working from the innermost outward. For the next two transmissions, I will be detailing the initial assessment of Old Ur-Kittat's phonetics and phonology, though particular attention will be paid to the latter. I am the Imperial Cadet, Cro Mar, and for the first of a two-part video session, I will look into the phoneme inventory of Old Ur-Kittat. What is phonetics and phonology? When we think about speech sounds and the subfield that describes them, we turn to phonetics and phonology. The former analyzes speech sounds through three areas: production, how the sounds are made; acoustics, how waveforms are transmitted; and perception, how acoustic signal is interpreted by the listener. Considering Korriban's breathable atmosphere, I will surmise that the nature of acoustics there is marginally different from Consonants and will not cover this topic. Instead, I will focus on the production and perception of speech sounds. With this established, let us now move on to phonology. The subfield of phonology concerns itself with the patterning of speech sounds. As such, these two subfields often go hand in hand with each other, with phonological analysis being dependent on phonetic data. This is also the case for Old Ur-Kittat. However, presentation of this information will not be equal. As I mentioned in the introduction, particular attention will be given to phonology, with phonetics only being mentioned where necessary. Furthermore, phonology, as it relates to the transmission, can be broken down into two areas: underlying representation and surface representation. The latter, surface representation, aligns itself with the production aspect of speech and will be the focus of the next transmission. This transmission focuses on the former, underlying representation, which deals more with perception, namely how speakers comprehend and categorize speech sounds. Layout of transmission. The categories that I will largely focus on are place of articulation and manner of articulation. Place denotes the location within the oral cavity or the mouth that a speech sound is made, while manner denotes the way in which airflow is altered to produce a sound. These two features will be exhibited on this chart, with place of articulation being marked horizontally and manner of articulation being marked vertically. The sounds of Old Ur-Kittat will be presented based on their manner and will be gradually filled in. Along with these sounds, a brief description for how to make them and a corresponding grapheme or written symbol will be provided. With this established, let us move on to filling out our phoneme inventory. Phonemes are the smallest units used for distinguishing between sounds. As such, all sounds presented exhibit some sort of contrast with one another, creating a different word of a language. Additionally, these sounds can be divided into two categories: consonants, which are produced by creating obstacles for airflow, and vowels, which exhibit only slight tongue movements but relatively free air movement. Our analysis of Old Ur-Kittat will begin with consonants. Stops. A stop is characterized by their complete obstruction of airflow, followed by an immediate release. For Old Ur-Kittat, there appears to have been three stops: the voiceless alveolar stop, the voiceless velar stop, g, and the voiceless uvular stop, g. As a side note, notice each sound's descriptions. As I present each sound, I will denote three features: its voicing, whether it's voiced or not, its placement of articulation, and its manner of articulation, in this order. Additionally, along with this description, I will also provide a diagram detailing how to produce these sounds. Assuming the Sith possessed an anatomy similar to that of a human, this diagram should suffice. Returning to the stops, each stop is produced by moving your tongue, your active articulator, to a different part of the upper point of your mouth, a passive articulator. By moving the tip of your tongue to the alveolar ridge, which is just behind the top row of teeth, you will produce D. By moving the body of your tongue to your velum or soft palate, you will produce G. Finally, by moving the body of your tongue to your uvula, the soft piece of flesh dangling at the back of your mouth, you will produce G. These three stops are presented on the phoneme chart as follows. Affricates. An affricate, like a stop, begins with the complete obstruction of airflow. However, where a stop then follows with a sudden release of air, an affricate will only open slightly, resulting in airflow that is still obstructed but not completely blocked. Old Ur-Kittat possessed two affricates: the voiceless alveolar affricate, T, and the voiceless palatal alveolar affricate, J. By moving the tip of your tongue to the alveolar ridge, you produce T. By moving the blade of your tongue to the palatal alveolar part of your mouth, just behind the alveolar ridge, you produce Ch. Fricatives. Fricatives are different from our previous two categories in that there is no complete obstruction of airflow. Rather, an obstruction narrow enough that it allows for continuous airflow, albeit a very turbulent one. In Old Ur-Kittat, there are three fricatives: the voiceless alveolar fricative, S, the voiceless palatal alveolar fricative, Sh, and the voiceless glottal fricative, H. To produce these sounds, bring the tip of your tongue close to the alveolar ridge. With that, you produce S. By bringing the blade of your tongue close to the palatal alveolar part of your mouth, you produce Sh. And finally, the production of H is different in that there is nothing in the oral cavity that needs to form the obstruction. The obstruction is instead caused by your vocal folds. With these features established, let us take the time to look at our updated phoneme inventory. The sounds I have just presented can also be grouped by another name: obstruents. For the remainder of this video, the remaining sounds will be covered by a group known as sonorants. Nasals. Nasals are a special sonorant in that airflow does not initially occur in the oral cavity, but rather in the nasal cavity. Ur-Kittat possesses two nasals: the voiced bilabial nasal, M, and the voiced alveolar nasal, N. By creating a complete obstruction of airflow with the top and bottom lip while breathing through your nose, then switching your breath as you release the closure, you produce M. By creating a complete obstruction of airflow with the tip of your tongue to your alveolar ridge while breathing through your nose, then switching the breath upon release of the closure, you produce N. Approximants. Perhaps unlike the other sounds, approximants are produced by creating so little an obstruction that there is little turbulence. Approximants make up the largest manner in Ur-Kittat with 4 sounds: the voiced bilabial velarized approximant, W, the voiced alveolar approximant, R, the voiced palatal approximant, Y, and the voiced palatal lateral approximant, Y. As I stated before, approximants will hardly create turbulence with their obstruction. So for all of these sounds, the means of production involve moving one's tongue slightly to each of the specific places of articulation. By moving the body of your tongue to your velum or soft palate and rounding your lips, you will produce W. By moving the body of your tongue to the alveolar ridge or palatal alveolar region and bringing your bottom lip to your top row of teeth, you will produce R. By moving the body of your tongue to the hard palate, you produce Y. And finally, the final approximant differs from the others in that rather than the airflow coming down the center of your tongue, airflow will instead come from the sides. Much like the palatal approximant, move the body of your tongue to the hard palate, but then lift the center of your tongue, thus lowering the sides, and you will produce Y. Returning to the now updated phoneme inventory, we see 21 sounds presented, and these reflect the consonants of Old Ur-Kittat. With this section settled, let us then move to the vowels. Old Ur-Kittat most likely possessed a 6-vowel system. Now, much like the consonants, the vowels will be produced along with the important features they need to distinguish between one another. These features being height, frontness or backness, and rounding. Along with this, I will also provide a vowel chart as I list them. Plotting them on the point as they are announced, the 6 vowels of Old Ur-Kittat are the high front unrounded vowel E, the low front unrounded vowel A, the high back rounded U, the mid back rounded O, the mid back unrounded A, and the low back unrounded ah. Conclusion and update on the next video. To conclude this video, I present the complete phoneme inventory of Old Ur-Kittat. The language exhibits 21 consonants and 6 vowels for a total of 27 phonemes. The purpose of this video was not only to provide the inventory, but to also give some tips for how to produce each sound. With this established, the next transmission will deal with surface representation, or production of speech sounds. Most importantly, it is there that I will introduce phonological rules that will detail how to pronounce a sound in a specific environment or context. I understand that these sound descriptions may not suffice in preparing a potential speaker and will provide several links in the description that will aid in practice. I recommend the interactive IPA chart as it also possesses recordings of each sound. If you liked what you saw here, then please subscribe and select the bell button so that you can get a notification for the next transmission. The next transmission will come out 2 weeks from now. So until then, this has been the Imperial Cadet, Cro Mar, wishing you a glorious day in the Empire.